Hey horror fam! I create dark, spine-chilling horror stories, and you can help keep the horror alive. Imagine it's like buying me a hauntingly delicious cup of coffee to fuel the next gruesome tale. If you'd like to support, you can donate. My PayPal link is in the description. And with YouTube's guidelines, creating R-rated content is tricky, so if you're up for more unfiltered scares, come join me on Patreon. Thanks for helping me keep the nightmares coming. The story opens with a quiet, unassuming town tucked away from the rest of the world, where nights are eerily silent, and shadows creep closer with every passing hour. Claire Wilkes, a 40-year-old woman known around town for her soft-spoken kindness, hides a monstrous addiction that claws at her every night. This craving isn't for companionship or comfort, it's for flesh and blood. Each sunset finds her transformed, driven by a primal hunger that no ordinary food could ever satisfy. Claire's predatory instincts are sharp, selecting men who wander alone or unsuspecting travelers who won't be missed. Her choice of slasher tools reflects her sinister taste, a collection of blades, saws, and hooks, each gleaming with anticipation as she readies her blood-soaked lair in her basement. The thrill of the hunt fuels her, her pulse racing as she toys with her victims, savoring the fear in their eyes before the violence begins. The suspense builds as we delve deeper into Claire's psyche. She relishes each horrific moment, mixing brutality with a twisted pleasure that goes beyond mere consumption. Torture is an art to her, a ritual where she explores the line between agony and ecstasy, her victims enduring unimaginable suffering before she feasts on their bodies. Blood is her drug, and the more she consumes, the harder it becomes to keep her cravings hidden, as her bloodlust spirals out of control. The townsfolk begin to suspect that something is terribly wrong. But every time someone draws too close, Claire ensures they meet a grisly end, skillfully covering her tracks to avoid suspicion. Her charm shields her in daylight, while her basement echoes with the desperate screams of her prey each night. As Claire's appetite grows, her methods become bolder, her twisted artistry evolving with each victim. No longer satisfied with just a quick kill, she prolongs the torture, testing the limits of her prey's endurance. She stalks quiet demeanor by day, betraying none of the deadly intentions that consume her each night. The thrill of domination, the rush of watching hope flicker and fade in their eyes, it drives her deeper into a pit of primal satisfaction. The town begins to feel a chilling undercurrent as rumors spread of men who vanished without a trace. A few begin to whisper about a predator in their midst, but Claire is meticulous, her basement lined with the silent trophies of her bloody secrets. Each tool, from rusted hacksaws to serrated blades, holds a story. And each time she wields them, Claire's face lights up with an unholy joy. The bloodstains on her floor become a twisted diary of her addiction, a crimson map of her descent into madness. One night, she lures a seasoned hunter into her web, a man whose strength and instincts sharpen the thrill. The game becomes a dance of shadows and strategy, and for the first time, Claire feels a glimmer of fear herself as he fights back, scratching, clawing, desperate to escape. Her excitement only heightens, the struggle feeds her, and with every injury she inflicts, the boundary between woman and beast shatters further. The hunter falls, finally subdued, his screams fading into silence as Claire's basement grows quieter, darker, more stained with her twisted pleasure. But her addiction is slipping out of control, her kills becoming sloppier, and the townspeople are closing in. Suspicion lurks in every glance, every polite conversation now tinged with paranoia. When a local detective arrives, intent on finding the missing men, Claire's world teeters on the edge. He is sharp, intuitive, the kind of man she might have evaded if she hadn't let her own indulgence cloud her judgment. She watches him closely, drawn to the challenge he presents, thrilled by the risk of discovery. Days pass with a quiet cat-and-mouse game, Claire's polite smiles masking the murderous intent lurking beneath. The detective piecing together the bloody puzzle she thought was hidden. The tension mounts as she realizes he is onto her, and in a desperate, final attempt to protect her secrets, she plots to bring him to her basement, where she can rid herself of him once and for all. On a stormy night, she invites him over under the guise of sharing information. Her lair is prepared, every blade gleaming, her pulse racing with excitement as she awaits his arrival. But as the door swings open, it becomes clear that he came prepared too, his eyes cold, his steps deliberate. What follows is a harrowing showdown, a brutal, blood-soaked clash between predator and prey, each wielding weapons, each fighting for survival. Claire, a force of unstoppable bloodlust, meets her match in a man driven by duty and determination. The basement echoes with the clash of metal, grunts, and screams, suspense tightening with every heartbeat. As dawn breaks, one emerges victorious, while the other becomes yet another grisly addition to Claire's twisted collection, an ending as dark and brutal as the tale itself, leaving only the lingering question of whether the victor might now harbor their own taste for blood. As the bodies mount and her addiction tightens its grip, the shadows of Claire's past begin to seep through, revealing a dark, tragic romance that still haunts her twisted soul. Years ago, Claire had been a different woman, a young, hopeful bride deeply in love with her husband, Daniel, a man whose passion and devotion matched her own. Their life was perfect, until one fateful night when everything shattered. Daniel had been brutally attacked on his way home by a group of men who left him for dead. By the time Claire found him, he was clinging to life, his blood spilling into the street as he tried to tell her the names of his attackers. She held him close, his final breaths slipping away as a promise formed in her mind. She would find those men and make them suffer as he had. Tasting their blood in a final act of vengeance, consumed by grief and rage, Claire set out to avenge Daniel, hunting each man with a single-minded obsession. Her first kill had been clumsy, desperate, but the rush she felt was addictive, igniting a need that went beyond vengeance. She realized that with each man she lured, tortured, and killed, she felt a piece of Daniel's presence return, as if their shared thirst for retribution bound them together beyond the grave. What had begun as revenge soon morphed into an uncontrollable addiction, a twisted ritual through which she felt Daniel's love all over again. The taste of blood became a haunting echo of the life they'd lost, each kill rekindling memories of his touch. His smile, the warmth that had been ripped from her. Her heart, shattered by his death, had found a dark, perverse way to remember him, one that fueled her nightly hunts with a manic, almost romantic fervor. As the detective digs deeper, he uncovers the story of Claire and Daniel, piecing together her tragic past with each scrap of information he finds. Claire, sensing his curiosity, begins to taunt him, leaving behind subtle clues that hint at her past and draw him closer to the truth. She's enthralled by him, feeling the echoes of her lost love and the thrill of their deadly game. His intensity reminds her of Daniel, his sharp intellect and relentless pursuit rekindling emotions she thought lost forever. Her obsession with him grows, and soon, she's not only hunting men to feed her addiction but also to keep him close, to draw him in deeper. In a final twist, Claire realizes she can't resist the urge to lure him to her basement, not just as her prey but as something much darker and more twisted, a successor. She sees in him a soul capable of the same darkness that consumes her, a man who might one day understand the pain and passion that drives her. She dreams of teaching him, of drawing him into her world where love and death intermittership that would make them both unstoppable. Their confrontation is not only a fight for survival but a battle between twisted love and justice. As they clash, Claire tries to convince him of her motives, laying bare the shattered heart that drives her bloody actions. The detective is torn, drawn to her tragic allure yet repelled by her monstrous deeds. In the end, the choice he faces becomes more than a matter of life or death. It is a question of whether he, too, will succumb to the seductive power of vengeance and bloodlust, or if he'll end her reign of terror once and for all. In the closing moments, their fates intertwine in a deadly embrace, a macabre, almost poetic end to a love story born in blood. And as the final blow is dealt, a last whisper of Daniel's name lingers in the air, leaving the audience haunted by the depth of Claire's twisted love and the deadly legacy it left behind. As Claire lay on the cold basement floor, bleeding from the brutal confrontation, a sick smile crept onto her face. She'd fought hard, matching the detective's skill and strength, but in her twisted mind, the battle was a form of courtship, a deadly game of passion and violence. Every strike, every moment he'd hesitated, only deepened her obsession. She was bleeding, her strength waning, but she saw something in his eyes, anger mixed with a glimmer of understanding. The detective, battered and haunted, stared down at her. His heart raced, and his mind spun with the horrific reality he'd uncovered. He knew she was a monster, yet her whispered pleas and haunting confessions of love for Daniel had gotten under his skin. Claire's story lingered in his mind like a poison, every detail of her tragic past digging into him, making him question whether he truly understood her motives. Summoning a final surge of strength, Claire staggered to her feet, reaching out to him. "You feel it too, don't you?" she rasped, her voice trembling with emotion. "You, something only we understand. Daniel's death, it showed me who I truly am. Maybe, just maybe, I'm here to show you who you really are." For a moment, he hesitated. The room fell silent, broken only by the faint sound of dripping blood. Claire's eyes bore into him with a look that was almost tender, twisted as it was by her madness. Her words clawed at his mind, and he felt his pulse quicken, as if some invisible force was binding him to her. There was a part of him, deep down, that almost wanted to understand her, to let himself be drawn into her world. He fought it, but the allure of her darkness gnawed at him, but his conscience held him firm. He took a step back, gripping his weapon tighter. "I'm not like you, Claire," he whispered. "Whatever tragedy you've endured, it doesn't justify the things you've done. You're beyond saving." Claire's face twisted with rage and heartbreak, her voice breaking. "Then why are you still here? If you really wanted to end this, you would have. But I know. I see it in your eyes. Part of you wants to stay." In a flash, she lunged at him, and they collided in a brutal struggle, their movements desperate, fueled by raw emotion and survival instinct. The basement was filled with the sound of clashing metal, heavy breaths, and cries of pain. Each slash, each brutal impact, drew them closer to a grisly end, each locked in a twisted bond neither could escape. The detective fought with every ounce of his strength, the memory of the missing men driving his rage. With a final, shattering blow, he managed to overpower her, pinning her to the ground. But as he looked down at her, bloodied and defeated, he saw something that chilled him to his core, a look of pure, undiluted satisfaction. In her twisted mind, this wasn't the end, it was exactly where she wanted to be. "Go ahead," she whispered, her voice a ghostly echo. "Do it. Give in to that darkness. Finish." He swung his weapon, ending her life in one swift, brutal motion. Her body lay still, the room falling silent as her blood pooled across the floor. But even in death, her face was frozen in that disturbing, satisfied smile, as if she'd won something far deeper than the battle itself. He stumbled out of the basement, feeling the weight of her last words, the taste of her darkness lingering in his mind. The town would be safe now, yet as he walked away, a shadow seemed to follow him, a whisper of the madness that had consumed Claire. He'd rid the town of a monster, but she'd left him with something haunting, a mark he could never erase, in the days that followed. He couldn't escape her presence, couldn't shake the feeling that, somehow, her twisted spirit had taken root within him. And as the darkness clawed at his thoughts, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, she'd planted a seed in him that would one day grow, urging him toward a bloodlust of his own. The tale ends with him standing at his reflection, staring at the hint of something new, something dark and insatiable lurking in his eyes, a reminder that in slaying the monster, he might have awakened one within himself. The detective, haunted by the memories of his confrontation with Claire, found himself unable to shake the chilling sense of connection he had developed with her. Days turned into weeks. But every night he returned to the basement where he had ended her life, replaying the events in his mind. He could still hear her voice, echoing in his thoughts like a siren song, drawing him closer to the abyss. As he stood before the mirror in his dimly lit apartment, he scrutinized his reflection, searching for the remnants of the man he used to be. But staring back at him was a stranger. His eyes glinted with a predatory sheen, a spark of darkness he couldn't quite comprehend. The thrill of the hunt, the adrenaline of battle, and the taste of victory, an insatiable hunger he had never known before. He tried to dismiss it, brushing it aside as a side effect of the trauma he had endured. Yet, the longer he looked, the more he recognized the change within himself. He had survived a monster, but now he was beginning to wonder if she had truly been defeated or if she had merely passed her darkness on to him. What had started as a mission to protect the town had become a nagging desire for more, a craving for the thrill of the chase, the ecstasy of blood on his hands, the euphoric rush of power over life and death. The detective's once unshakable resolve began to waver. He found himself drawn to the underbelly of the city, searching for shadows to fill the void Claire had left. He prowled the streets at night, his heart racing with excitement as he chased down criminals, targeting those who preyed on the innocent. With each confrontation, the adrenaline coursed through him, igniting the same rush he had felt during his final battle with Claire, but the line between justice and vengeance blurred dangerously. Each victory only served to fuel his growing appetite for bloodshed, and the thrill began to drown out the reason. The faces of those he hunted echoed in his mind, twisting into the haunting visage of Claire, urging him to embrace the darkness she had awakened within him. One night, he followed a lead to a seedy bar on the outskirts of town. A place where desperation hung in the air like a thick fog. Inside, he watched as a group of men gathered, their laughter cruel and their intentions sinister. A familiar thrill danced down his spine, igniting a fire he could no longer ignore. This was what Claire had felt, the intoxicating power of hunting those who deserved it. The rush surged through him, and in that moment, he realized he was no longer the hunter but the hunted, chasing something he could barely call on. He descended deeper into this world, seeking out those who indulged in the darker pleasures of life. He flirted with danger, reveling in the thrill of potential violence, slipping further into the abyss where Claire had danced. He began to stalk his prey, each encounter pushing him further from his former self. The memories of his days as a detective faded into the background, replaced by a consuming need for the hunt, for the kill, but with every act of violence, the darkness inside him grew stronger, morphing into something monstrous. He began to have visions of Claire, her smile a twisted invitation to join her in her world of blood and pleasure. In the dead of night, he could hear her whispering his name, coaxing him to give in completely, to embrace the darkness as she had. One fateful evening, driven by an insatiable craving, he found himself standing over a man who had crossed his path. This time, he wasn't merely subduing a threat, he was savoring the moment, relishing the power in his hands. As he lifted the weapon, the thrill surged through him, echoing Claire's laughter in his ears. It was in that instant that he fully realized he had become what he once sought to destroy. In the aftermath, as the darkness settled around him, the detective stared into the same mirror, but this time the reflection was that of a killer, a man who had succumbed to the very monster he had vowed to eradicate. He was Claire, a predator masked as a protector, and with that realization, a sinister smile curled on his lips. The detective had stepped into a new role, one where he no longer fought against the darkness but had embraced it, becoming a part of the horrific cycle that had ensnared him. He was now a slasher in his own right, leaving behind the life he had once known, fully aware that the monster had not been slain but had merely changed forms. As he walked away from the mirror, the shadow promised eternal pleasure in the chaos he had now become a part of. The legacy of Claire lived on within him, and as the moonlight streamed through his window, he felt the insatiable hunger for blood grow stronger, whispering the same seductive call that had drawn him into her world. The detective was reborn, a creature of the night, ready to carve a path through the darkness and bring forth his own reign of terror, fully aware that the line between monster and man had forever. In the aftermath of the detective's transformation, Claire's legacy hung heavy in the air like a thick fog, permeating every corner of his mind. He wandered through the shadows, craving the thrill of the hunt, the taste of fear, and the intoxicating pleasure of control. The darkness had seeped into his veins, igniting a flame that could not be extinguished. With each passing night, he sought out the seedy underbelly of the city, where depravity mingled with desire. In a hidden club known only to those who walked the line between pleasure and pain, he found himself surrounded by men and women who reveled in the darkest corners of their desires. It was here that he felt most alive, surrounded by the seductive energy of bodies intertwined in a dance of lust and violence. The air was thick with tension as he watched a woman on stage, her movements a hypnotic blend of grace and savagery. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen, her eyes gleamed with a predatory hunger, drawing him in like a moth to a flame. She reminded him of Claire, her essence swirling with the promise of danger and ecstasy. He couldn't help but be entranced as she performed, broken desires hanging heavy between them. Are you here for pleasure or for pain? She asked, her voice a seductive whisper that sent shivers down his spine. Both, he replied, unable to hide the darkness that lurked beneath his words. Raven smiled, revealing a glimpse of her own predatory nature. She was a creature of the night, just as he had become. Their connection was immediate, igniting a dangerous spark that promised both ecstasy and chaos. As they danced together, bodies close, he felt the remnants of his humanity slip away, but beneath Raven's alluring exterior lay a secret that mirrored his own. She was entangled in a world of death and desire, a slasher in her own right. With each man she seduced, she drew them into a twisted game of domination, a deadly dance that left a trail of bodies in her wake. The detective found himself drawn to her, not just for her beauty but for the darkness that connected them. Their affair spiraled into a tempest of bloodlust and pleasure, and soon, the detective was swept away by the thrill of their shared depravity. Together, they engaged in a dangerous game, hunting down men who had escaped justice, delivering their own brand of retribution. With Raven by his side, he felt invincible, liberated by the primal urge that coursed through them, but their bond was not without its complications. The more he delved into her world, the more he began to unravel her true nature. Raven was a woman driven by revenge, hunting down those who had wronged her in the most visceral way possible. As he joined her on these dark excursions, he found himself questioning where pleasure ended and cruelty began. Each kill ignited a primal satisfaction, yet beneath the euphoria lay a gnawing doubt. One night, as they stalked their latest victim through the back alleys of the city, he felt a pang of fear for the first time since embracing the darkness. Their prey was a man whose actions had led to the brutal end of a loved one. The detective could see the fire in her eyes, the bloodlust igniting a dangerous mania as she prepared to exact her vengeance. Are you ready? Raven asked, her voice low and sultry, a seductive challenge that sent shivers through him. Always, he replied, the thrill of the hunt consuming him. As they cornered the man, Raven unleashed a primal scream, launching herself at him with a ferocity that took the detective by surprise. The air crackled with tension as she plunged a knife into her target, savoring each moment as she relished his pain. He watched, transfixed, the allure of the kill enveloping him, yet something deep inside him churned with unease. Join me, Raven called, her voice dripping with ecstasy, urging him to partake in the slaughter. But in that moment, the detective hesitated, the image of Claire flashing before him, the woman who had awakened the monster within. Her spirit lingered in the recesses of his mind, a haunting reminder of the choices he had made. The darkness that had once excited him now felt suffocating, and he realized he was on the brink of becoming the very thing he had sought to escape. In a fit of rage and jealousy, Raven noticed his hesitation, and it ignited a storm of fury within her. You're weak, she spat, her voice dripping with disdain. You want to play the savior, but we are the monsters of this world. Embrace it. Embrace me. The detective wrestled with his emotions, the pull of his twisted desires clashing with the remnants of his former self. The line between pleasure and pain blurred, and he felt the darkness within him surging. He could either become the ultimate predator alongside Raven or slip back into the light, losing everything they had built together. As the man's screams filled the alley, Raven turned her gaze back to him, her eyes wild with fury and hunger. Finish this with me. Show me how. Roar, the detective lunged forward, driven by an overwhelming rush of bloodlust. He plunged his knife into the man's chest alongside Raven, their bodies entwined in a savage embrace of passion and death. The rush of the kill ignited something inside him, an ecstasy that filled him with both horror and delight. Together, they painted the alleyway in shades of crimson, the intoxicating scent of blood filling the air. But in that moment of twisted unity, the detective felt Claire's presence hovering at the edge of his consciousness, a reminder of the darkness he had fully embraced. The thrill of their union with Raven would haunt him, each kill, each moment of pleasure would carry with it a piece of his humanity that was forever lost. As they stood together, panting and covered in blood, Raven smiled wickedly, her eyes glimmering with satisfaction. "Welcome to our world, my love," she purred, entwining her fingers with his, sealing their bond in blood and sin. In that moment, he understood the true horror of their connection. They were bound not just by lust and darkness, but by the undeniable truth that they were now creatures of the night, partners in a twisted dance of death and desire. And as the moon rose high in the sky, illuminating their bloody handiwork, he felt the insatiable hunger deep within him grow stronger, whispering the promise of more chaos to come. The night air was thick with the coppery scent of blood, an intoxicating perfume that wrapped around Claire and the detective, intertwining them in a dark embrace. As they stood amidst the carnage, adrenaline coursed through their veins, an electric charge that hinted at the depravity they had unleashed upon the world. Claire, her heart racing and eyes wide with lust, felt more alive than ever. "Can you feel it?" she whispered, her voice dripping with a blend of excitement and satisfaction. "The power we hold, the thrill of the hunt." "It's just his mind still reeling from the visceral pleasure of the kill," nodded slowly. The world around him began to fade, all that remained was Claire, the embodiment of his darkest desires. He was caught in her web, a seductive trap he couldn't escape. With every beat of his heart, he was drawn deeper into her world, a universe where morality no longer existed. "Let's keep playing," Claire urged, her lips curling into a wicked smile. "There's a whole city waiting for us. So many souls in need of release." In that moment, he realized they were no longer just hunters, they had become predators, prowling the streets under the veil of night. With a shared glance, they made their way back to the hidden club where they first met. A place that pulsed with the undercurrent of desire and danger. As they entered, the atmosphere shifted, thickening with tension. The walls whispered secrets of sin, and the dim lighting illuminated bodies entwined in a primal dance. The energy was intoxicating, every heartbeat a reminder of the darkness they now embraced. They moved through the crowd, their fingers brushing against the flesh of onlookers, leaving a trail of lust in their wake. They found a secluded corner, a small table shrouded in shadows, where they could observe the chaos. Claire leaned in, her breath hot against his ear. "Watch them. Feel their desire. It's almost like the hunt, but better." The detective's pulse quickened as he observed the patrons around them, each lost in their own twisted fantasies. But Claire had other plans. She was hungry for more than just the thrill of the crowd. She craved an audience for their next act of violence, a spectacle that would leave them gasping in awe and terror. With a wicked grin, she leaned back and scanned the room. Her gaze landed on a man, muscular and confident, leaning against the bar with a drink in hand, oblivious to the deadly intentions brewing near about him. She suggested, her voice laced with excitement, "Do you think he's ready?" The detective asked, a smirk playing on his lips as he contemplated the scene unfolding before them. "Ready? He's begging for it." Claire stood, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "Let's give him a night he won't forget." As they approached the man, Claire exuded an air of seduction, a mesmerizing aura that drew him in. She played the part perfectly, laughing at his jokes and letting her fingers dance lightly across his arm. The detective watched from the sidelines, adrenaline spiking as he anticipated the impending violence. "Why don't we take this somewhere more private?" Claire purred, leaning closer, her lips brushing against the man's ear. He nodded eagerly, completely unaware of the darkness that lurked behind her alluring facade. They led him to a back room, a small, dimly lit space that had been abandoned by the revelers. The air was thick with tension as Claire closed the door behind them, sealing their fate within those four walls. "Just the three of us," Claire said, her voice dripping with seduction, turning to face the man. "Are you ready for a little fun?" Before he could respond, the detective emerged from the shadows, a wicked grin on his face. The man's eyes widened, realization dawning upon him too late. Claire lunged forward, her knife glinting in the low light as she plunged it into his side. Savoring the moment as blood sprayed across the walls, the man gasped in shock, eyes wide with terror, but Claire was relentless. "Did you think you could have me without consequence?" she hissed, her voice low and filled with rage. As he crumpled to the floor, the detective felt the thrill of their shared depravity surge within him. The rush of violence ignited something primal in him, a flicker of joy that sent him spiraling deeper into the abyss. Together, they unleashed their fury, reveling in the savagery of their... As they began to lose themselves in the ecstasy of the kill, the detective noticed something out of the corner of his eye, a flicker of movement in the shadows. A figure stood outside the door, silhouetted against the light of the hallway. Panic surged through him as he realized they had been watched. "Claire!" he shouted, breaking her trance as she savored the final moments of their victim. She turned, her eyes ablaze with fury, but the detective was already moving, pushing her behind him as he rushed toward the door. "Who's there?" he called out, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The last thing they needed was an audience. The door swung open, and a woman stepped inside. Her face pale and eyes wide. I saw everything," she stammered, fear etched across her features. Claire's gaze flicked to the detective, a wicked smile curving her lips. "Looks like we have another guest," she said, her voice sultry and dangerous. "Wait, please. Don't hurt me." The woman pleaded, backing away toward the wall, desperation in her eyes. But Claire was already stepping closer, the thrill of the hunt igniting within her. "Oh, darling, we're just getting started," she crooned, her knife glinting in the dim light. "You're in for a treat." The detective's heart raced as he watched the scene unfold, a mix of horror and exhilaration flooding his senses. Claire had become an unstoppable force. A beautiful predator reveling in the chaos she had created. With a quick, decisive movement, she lunged at the woman, but the detective's instincts kicked in. "No. Let her go," he shouted, realizing that the darkness within him was starting to blur the lines of who he truly was. Claire paused, surprise flickering across her face. "What? You're not going soft on me now, are you?" "I'm not soft," he replied, his voice steady but his heart pounding. "But we can't leave a witness." Pulled against the wall, eyes darting between them. "I won't say a word. Just please don't hurt me." "Then leave," the detective ordered, his voice firm. "Get out of here." Claire narrowed her eyes, a dangerous smile playing on her lips. "And what if she tells someone? You think we can just walk away from this?" "Then we'll find her again," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "But not now. I won't let you kill her. Not like this." The tension in the room crackled as Claire contemplated his words. Finally, she backed away, allowing the woman a moment to breathe. "Fine. But you better hope she stays quiet." The detective watched as the woman bolted for the door, fleeing into the night. Once she was gone, he turned to Claire, his heart racing. "What have we done?" She stepped closer, her gaze piercing through him. "We embraced who we are. You feel it, don't you? The power, the thrill. It's only the beginning." He was torn between the darkness that beckoned him and the lingering remnants of his former self. In the haze of blood and adrenaline, he realized the true horror of their connection. The monster within him had been awakened, and it craved more. As they exited the back room, the club pulsed with life, the sounds of laughter and desire echoing around them. But the detective felt a shift within himself, a transformation that threatened to consume him entirely. Claire's hand slipped into his, squeezing tightly. "Together, we'll paint this city red," she whispered, her voice seductive and dark. As they stepped into the chaos of the night, he knew there was no turning back. The seductive allure of violence wrapped around him like a shroud, and he felt the monster within him roar to life, ready for the next hunt, the next thrill. And with Claire by his side, he knew they were destined to become legends in the world of shadows and blood, two slayers bound by desire, lust, and an insatiable hunger for Claire and the detective merged into the throbbing heartbeat of the club. They became an inseparable force, predators cloaked in desire. The dim lights flickered above them, casting unsettling shadows that danced across the walls, mirroring the darkness that had taken root in their souls. But beneath the surface of their newfound partnership lay secrets and mysteries that begged to be unraveled. The detective, still grappling with the rush of violence they had unleashed, found himself haunted by flashes of the woman they had let go. Had they made a mistake? Or had Claire's intoxicating grip over him truly awakened something monstrous? He was unsure, but his instincts told him they were being watched. They navigated through the pulsating crowd, Claire's laughter ringing in his ears like a siren's call. She led him to a private booth shrouded in shadows, a place where whispered secrets merged with the scent of lust and danger. "Let's have a drink," she said, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "We deserve it after that little performance." He watched her as she ordered a pair of drinks, entranced by her presence, the way she commanded attention effortlessly. But a nagging sensation crawled beneath his skin, and as he looked around, he caught sight of a figure in the corner, a man, his gaze fixed intently on Claire. The detective's protective instincts flared. "Who's that?" he asked. His voice low and edged with concern. Claire followed his gaze, her expression darkening. "Just someone who thinks he can get close. Let him watch. It'll be more fun that way." A chill ran down his spine as Claire's words sank in. He realized she had no fear, she thrived on the danger. But there was something unsettling about the way the man watched them, a predatory gleam in his eyes that mirrored Claire's. He felt a strange connection between them, a bond forged in darkness that hinted at shared secrets. Claire, placing a finger against his lips, her breath warm and intoxicating. "Relax. Just enjoy the show." Her gaze flicked back to the man, a wicked smile spreading across her lips. As the night wore on, the detective's unease deepened. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone in their bloodlust. The man in the corner had vanished, slipping into the shadows as Claire continued to weave her spell over the crowd. But just as the detective began to relax, he noticed a familiar face. A woman, one of Claire's previous victims, had reappeared at the edge of the room, her eyes wild with terror. "Claire!" he shouted, rising from his seat, but she was lost in a thrall of excitement. Oblivious to the danger closing in, the detective's instincts kicked in. He rushed toward the woman, grasping her arm. "What are you doing here? You need to leave." She trembled, her gaze darting around the club. "I couldn't get away. I saw her, the killer. I saw Claire. Listen to me, you need to go. Now." He could feel the tension crackling in the air, a storm brewing as Claire approached, a wicked grin plastered across her face. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice laced with mock sweetness, eyes glinting with mischief. The detective stood between her and the woman, heart racing. "You can't hurt her, Claire. We need to figure this out." The wild woman's eyes widened in disbelief. "The hunt is exhilarating, but the chase is even better." She turned her gaze back to the woman. "And now, you're part of it." With a sudden, fluid motion, Claire lunged at the woman, but the detective intervened, grabbing Claire's wrist. "No. You can't do this. Not again." The club erupted into chaos as people screamed and scattered, the intoxicating energy shifting into pure panic. "Let go of me," Claire hissed, the primal rage flashing in her eyes. "You're ruining everything. You don't have to do this, Claire. You can stop." He pleaded, desperate to reignite the humanity he hoped was still in her. But in that moment, something shifted in Claire's gaze, something dark and ancient. A hunger that eclipsed everything else. "You don't understand, detective. I'm not the monster. I'm the answer to your darkest desires." As he struggled to hold her back, a flash of movement caught his eye. The man from earlier had returned, now standing at the threshold, a sinister smile playing on his lips. "Looks like the party is just getting started. Who the hell are you?" the detective demanded, anger and fear mingling within him. I'm just a friend, the man replied smoothly, eyes glinting with a malevolent sheen. A friend of Claire's, you could say. We share an understanding. The detective felt his heart race, a cold realization dawning on him. You're one of them. Another predator. Predator? No, I prefer the term connoisseur, the man said, stepping closer, his gaze flickering between Claire and the detective. And tonight, I think we'll both enjoy the same meal. Before he could react, the man lunged forward, seizing the terrified woman. The detective's instincts kicked in, and he charged, but Claire was faster. She pushed him aside, her knife flashing in the dim light as she aimed for the man, but he was prepared, ducking under her strike with an ease that sent a shiver down the detective's spine. You really think you can take me on? His eyes wild with delight. In the chaos, the woman broke free, darting toward the exit. Help me! She screamed, desperation lacing her voice. The detective couldn't let her go again. Get out! He shouted, but the man lunged after her, and Claire, now caught in the thrill of the moment, shifted her focus to him. Stop! The detective shouted, moving between them. You can't have her. Why not? Claire's laughter rang out, eerie and beautiful. She's just another plaything in our world. But as the man closed in on the woman, something snapped in the detective. With a surge of adrenaline, he tackled the man, sending them both crashing to the floor. The club erupted into chaos. The scent of blood mingling with the acrid smoke of fear. In the midst of it all, Claire watched, a twisted smile on her lips, reveling in the violence. Do you see now? She called out, her voice echoing over the din. This is what we are. The darkness, the pleasure, it's all part of the game. With a primal roar, the detective grappled with the man, a flurry of fists and desperation. He needed to protect the woman, to stop the violence from spiraling out of control. But as they fought, the weight of Claire's gaze bore down on him, and he felt the thrill of bloodlust creeping in, whispering sweet promises of power and pleasure. Join us, Claire purred, stepping closer, her eyes glowing with excitement. Together, we can be unstoppable. He glanced up, locking eyes with her, and for a heartbeat, he felt the pull of darkness. But then he looked at the woman, trembling and terrified, and he remembered the person he once was, the detective who sought justice, not bloodshed. With renewed determination, he pushed the man off him and threw a punch that connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling backward. Get out of here! He shouted at the woman again, urgency lacing his voice. She hesitated for a split second, fear battling against the instinct to flee. He roared, and finally, she bolted, disappearing into the chaos of the club. Don't you dare! Claire screamed, furious and beautiful, the monster within her raging, but as she lunged at the detective, he was ready. He sidestepped her attack, using the momentum to send her crashing into the bar. Bottles shattered, glass and liquor spilling everywhere, creating a deadly landscape of chaos. Claire, you need to stop. He shouted, but she merely laughed, rising to her feet, the bloodlust radiating from her. I will never stop. She declared, a glint of madness dancing in her eyes. You can't take this from me. But just as the detective thought he had lost her completely, she froze. Her gaze locking onto something behind him. Before he could turn, a flash of steel glimmered in the dim light, a knife aimed directly at his back. He spun around just in time, barely avoiding the thrust, and instinctively reached for his own weapon. The man stood there, grinning with satisfaction. You're too late, detective. You've stepped into a game you can't win. The detective's heart raced as he readied himself for the final confrontation. Claire, momentarily distracted, took advantage of the chaos. She surged forward, ready to strike. Get away from him! She screamed, her voice a twisted melody of anger and excitement. In that moment, the detective realized the truth. This was a world of pleasure and pain. A place where morality faded into shadows, and he was caught in a dangerous dance between light and dark. Claire, we can end this, he pleaded, a desperate hope burning within him. But the twisted game had just begun, and the night was far from over. As the chaos in the club reached a fever pitch, Claire's laughter rang out like a siren's call, seductive and deadly. She reveled in the frenzy, the pounding music merging with the thundering of her heart. The taste of blood, the thrill of the hunt, it all coiled around her like a live. He was caught in her web, drawn deeper into a world of dark desires and twisted secrets. With a swift motion, Claire grabbed a broken bottle from the bar, the glass glinting ominously in the low light. "You don't understand what we're part of," she shouted over the cacophony, eyes gleaming with a feral hunger. "This isn't just about killing. It's about the ecstasy that comes with it. It's freedom." The detective, heart racing and mind racing faster, could see the lines blurring in her eyes. The woman he had once believed to be human was slipping away, replaced by something primal, something that craved destruction. He needed to reach her before she vanished completely into the abyss. "Claire!" he shouted, urgency and desperation lacing his voice. "Fight this. You don't have to be a monster." But her laughter was like ice, cruel and taunting. "You think I want to fight it? You're the one who needs to embrace the darkness. Look at what we've done. Look at the power we wield." The man from earlier was scrambling to his feet, clutching his jaw, eyes wild with rage and lust. "You think you can take her from me?" he spat, a malevolent grin spreading across his face. "You're just a pawn in this game." Claire turned, her gaze shifting between the detective and the man, a wicked smile creeping across her lips. "Oh, darling, this isn't a game. This is a feast." In a flash, she lunged toward the detective, but he was ready. He sidestepped, dodging her strike, and grabbed her wrist, twisting it behind her back. "You need to listen to me, Claire. We can still save you." She hissed in frustration, but then, a flicker of something softer passed over her features. "Save me?" she repeated, voice dripping with sarcasm. "From what? From the life I've chosen?" He hesitated, the heat of her body against his igniting a dangerous fire within him. "This isn't who you are. You were once full of light." Expression twisted with a dark yearning. "You're wrong. This is who I am now. And I like it. I crave it." With a sudden burst of strength, Claire broke free from his grip, spinning to face him with the broken bottle raised high. "You could join me, you know. Imagine the power, the pleasure." The detective's mind raced, torn between the woman he once knew and the predator she had become. "We could get out of here," he urged, desperate to rekindle the spark of humanity he hoped still flickered within her. But Claire's eyes danced with a wild fire, and the man from earlier stepped closer, a wicked smirk on his face. "You can't save her. She's already chosen her path. And now, so have you." In a heartbeat, he lunged at the detective, but Claire was faster. She dove to intercept the blow, crashing into the man with a fierce energy that sent them both sprawling. The broken bottle clattered to the ground, and in an instant, the club erupted into chaos again. "Get out!" the detective shouted, but his voice was drowned by screams and shouts, the pulsing music fueling the panic around them. He could barely keep his focus as Claire wrestled with the man, the two of them entwined in a deadly dance, each movement laced with raw, chaotic energy. In the corner of the club, the terrified woman who had managed to escape their earlier confrontation was still watching, her eyes wide with disbelief and horror. She stepped closer, drawn to the chaos, desperate for answers but terrified of what she might find. The detective locked eyes with her, urgency coursing through him. "You need to leave. Now." But just as he turned back to Claire and the man, a gunshot rang out, reverberating through the air like a thunderclap. The crowd fell silent, shock spreading like wildfire. Claire froze, eyes wide, as the man staggered backward, clutching his side. Blood. Claire screamed, panic rising in her voice as the club descended into chaos once more. She spun around, searching for the source, but the detective's heart sank as he recognized the truth. This was not an accident. The woman had pulled a gun, her face twisted in fear and determination. "Stay away from him," She shouted, voice shaking but resolute, "No." The detective shouted, stepping between her and Claire. "This isn't what you want." But the woman was resolute. "He's dangerous. They both are. Just put the gun down," he pleaded, desperate to defuse the tension spiraling out of control. "Claire, you don't want this." But Claire's eyes blazed with fury, rage bubbling to the surface. "You think you can just walk away? You're part of this now. You've tasted the darkness." "Darkness?" The woman echoed, confusion and fear swirling in her gaze. "What darkness? What are you talking about?" The detective felt the walls closing in, the suffocating grip of the club's chaos overwhelming him. "I can explain. Just let me," but Claire cut him off with a shriek of fury, charging toward the woman. "You don't get to interfere. This is my life. My hunt." With a swift, brutal motion, Claire knocked the gun from the woman's hands, sending it skidding across the floor. The detective felt time slow as he lunged to retrieve it, but Claire was faster. In a flash, she had turned the weapon on the woman. Her breath ragged, eyes blazing with an intoxicating mix of fear and power. "You should have stayed away. You don't understand what I am." "Claire, no." The detective shouted, panic surging through him. "This isn't you." But Claire's laugh rang out, sharp and full of madness. "You don't get it, do you? I am the monster. And I love it." The man who had attacked earlier was still down, groaning, blood pooling beneath him. The club was filled with screams and chaos, but in that moment, all that mattered was Claire, the predator she had become, "Don't you see?" Claire continued, voice low and seductive, drawing the detective's gaze. "I've awakened something within you too. You can feel it, can't you? The thrill of the hunt, the taste of blood. We're bound by this darkness now." He shook his head, denial flooding through him. "No. This isn't who we are." But as Claire stepped closer, the gun aimed steadily at the woman, he felt the pull of the abyss. The intoxicating allure of power, of violence, whispered sweet promises in his ear, promising freedom from the shackles of morality. "Join me," Claire coaxed, her voice a sultry purr, filled with dark promise. "We can be unstoppable together. Imagine the world we could create." But the detective clenched his fists, fighting against the seductive pull. "I can't." A flash of movement caught his eye, and in that split second, he dove forward, shoving Claire aside just as the woman regained her footing. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the chaos, but the shot was not aimed at Claire, it was aimed at the detective. Time seemed to slow as he felt the bullet graze past him, a searing pain shooting through his shoulder. He stumbled back, hitting the floor hard as shock and adrenaline coursed through him. "Stop!" Claire screamed, but it was too late. The detective's vision blurred as he struggled to rise, to put himself between Claire and the chaos. But as he looked up, the wild woman was already gone, sprinting toward the exit. The club erupted into even more chaos, bodies pushing and shoving, fear spreading like wildfire. "Get back here!" Claire shouted, fury and desperation lacing her voice. She lunged toward the door, but the detective was on his feet again, grabbing her wrist. "No. Don't." But Claire's eyes burned with a ferocity he had never seen before. "You don't get to dictate what I do. I'm not your puppet." With a sudden twist, she broke free, shoving him back with brutal force. Watched her dart toward the exit. In that moment, everything shifted. Claire was lost in the chaos, a predator among prey, and he was left grappling with the remnants of a choice he never wanted to make. He felt the weight of his own decisions pressing down on him, the choices that had led him here, to this moment of darkness, but deep within him, something stirred. A flicker of hope, a longing to save her from the abyss that beckoned so sweetly. As he steadied himself, he made a choice. With a surge of determination, he pushed through the chaos, following the path Claire had taken. He wouldn't let her slip away, not without a fight. Outside the club, the cool night air hit him like a wave. refreshing and sharp. The world was alive with sirens and distant screams, but he focused solely on Claire. She was standing in the parking lot, a silhouette against the lights, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "You should have stayed inside," she shouted, rage and frustration clawing at her. "Claire," he said, voice steady despite the pain in his shoulder, "this isn't who you are." Her gaze flickered, uncertainty crossing her features. "And who am I?" she demanded, voice thick with emotion. "What am I supposed to be?" He stepped closer, the distance between them charged with tension. "You're still Claire. You're still the woman I fell for, the one who brought light into my life. This isn't the way." But Claire shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes. "You don't understand. The darkness is all I have now. I can't go back." He took another step, ignoring the pain. "You don't have to. Let me help you fight it. Together, we can take control of this, channel it into something else." But the turmoil inside her flared, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. "You're a fool," she spat, turning away from him, arms crossed tightly. "You'll only get hurt." The detective's heart raced, desperation clawing at him. "Rather face the darkness with you than lose you to it." In that moment, something in her expression shifted. The cold mask of the predator cracked, revealing a glimpse of the woman beneath, the woman he loved. "You don't know what you're asking for." "Yes, I do," he replied, voice steady. "You're worth the risk. We can end this together." Torn between the man she had begun to care for and the monstrous hunger that threatened to consume her, Claire felt a surge of rage and pain, spiraling into a bottomless pit of uncertainty. "What if I can't? What if I hurt you? Then I'll be the one to stop you," he said, holding her gaze fiercely. "But I won't let you go without a fight." Suddenly, the sound of approaching sirens sliced through the air, the harsh reality of their situation crashing down. Claire's eyes widened in panic. "They're coming. We have to go." Before he could respond, Claire turned and sprinted toward the darkness of the alleyway behind the club, pulling him along with her. "Come on. We have to hide." The detective followed her, heart pounding, adrenaline surging. As they ducked into the shadows, Claire pressed against the cold brick wall, their bodies barely inches apart. In that moment of intimacy, he could feel the heat radiating off her, the desperation in her eyes mirroring his own. "What now?" she whispered, breathless. "We find a way to escape," he replied, heart racing. "But first, we have to confront what you've become." Her gaze flickered with fear, a shadow passing over her features. "What if I can't control it? What if I can't stop?" "Then I'll help you fight," he promised. Could feel the weight of the world pressing down on them, the choices they made echoing through the night. And as he glanced at Claire, he knew one thing for certain: this was just the beginning. In the heart of darkness, they would either find their salvation or become the monsters they feared most. As they pressed deeper into the shadows of the alleyway, the sirens began to fade, replaced by an eerie stillness that made the detective's skin prickle with unease. The darkness felt alive, wrapping around them like a suffocating blanket, and Claire's breath was a hot whisper against his ear. "What if they find us?" she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "They won't," he assured her, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We'll wait until it's clear, and then we'll figure out our next move." But Claire's eyes were glazed with a wild mix of fear and something darker, something primal that threatened to break free. "I can feel it inside me," she confessed, a tremor in her voice. "The urge to kill. It's so strong." The detective's heart raced, a jolt of adrenaline surging through him. "You're stronger than this. You can fight it." "Can I?" she snapped, frustration bubbling to the surface. "What if it takes me over? What if I can't control it? I might hurt you, or worse." Her voice trailed off, leaving the unsaid words hanging between them. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek, grounding her. "You won't. I believe in you." But as the shadows swirled around them, the weight of their situation pressed down, filling the air with tension. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the faint sounds of police chatter, but it was drowned out by the throbbing in his chest. The stakes were higher than ever, and their time was running out. Suddenly, Claire's expression shifted, a predatory glint igniting in her eyes. "We should lure them in," she said, a smile creeping onto her lips that sent "Let's give them a show." Claire. His warning hung in the air, but he could already see the excitement brewing within her. The darkness that had clawed its way into her heart was awakening a twisted sense of power. "Think about it," she urged, leaning closer, her breath hot against his skin. "I can be the perfect bait. It'll give us time to plan our escape." His heart pounded in his chest, torn between the thrill of her suggestion and the fear of what it could unleash. "This isn't a game." "Maybe it should be," she said, eyes sparkling with a dangerous allure. "You're not afraid, are you?" He hesitated, the danger in her proposition igniting something within him. "No, I'm not," he replied, the words coming out firmer than he intended. "Then let's play," she said, stepping back and glancing toward the street, her body tense with anticipation. "We'll draw them in," and then, before she could finish, the sound of footsteps echoed in the alley, and the detective's heart skipped a beat. A group of officers appeared, their flashlights cutting through the dark like knives. He pulled Claire deeper into the shadows, their bodies pressed against the damp brick wall, hearts racing in sync. "Over here." One of the officers shouted, the sound growing louder. "They can't have gone far." Claire's eyes widened, a mix of fear and thrill dancing across her features. "What now?" she whispered, the thrill of the hunt igniting a fire within her. "Get ready," he whispered back, adrenaline coursing through him. "We're going to turn this around." As the officers moved closer, he could see the tension radiating from Claire. She was a coiled spring, ready to snap. "On 3, he said, holding his breath. 1. 2. Before he could finish, Claire lunged forward, her eyes blazing with feral energy. She emerged from the shadows, a wild predator ready to unleash chaos. The officers turned, watched in awe and horror as she moved with a grace and precision he had never seen before. With a swift motion, she disarmed one of the officers, sending his weapon clattering to the ground. "Claire, stop!" he shouted, but his words were swallowed by the night. In a whirlwind of violence, she spun around, tackling another officer to the ground, her hands like steel as she wrestled him into submission. The sound of shouts and struggles filled the air, creating a cacophony of chaos that only fueled her frenzy. "Look at me!" she yelled, eyes wild with adrenaline. "This is who I am. This is what I'm meant to be." The detective felt a strange mix of horror and excitement as he watched her embrace her darker side. But he also felt the tug of danger tightening around them like a noose. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about surrendering to the darkness. "Claire!" he shouted, moving to intervene, but she was already lost in the frenzy, a whirlwind of violence and passion. She caught his eye for a moment, and in that brief connection, he saw a flicker of the woman he had fallen in love with, the one who had brought light into his life. "Help me!" she screamed, grappling with the last officer, desperation creeping into her voice. "I can't stop." In that moment, he lunged forward, grabbing her arm and pulling her back, away from the chaos. "We need to go," he shouted, urgency flooding his voice. But Claire hesitated, caught between the exhilaration of the fight and the man who still believed in her. "What if I can't control it?" she asked, vulnerability seeping through her bravado. "You can. We can," he insisted, the words spilling from him like a lifeline. "I won't let you lose yourself to this." With a fierce determination, Claire nodded, her expression shifting as the adrenaline began to ebb. Together, they turned and sprinted down the alley, the sounds of chaos emerged onto a side street, breathless and trembling. Claire leaned against the wall, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "What now?" she asked, fear flickering in her eyes. He paused, heart racing as he scanned the surroundings. We need to find somewhere safe, somewhere to regroup. Claire's gaze flicked toward the street ahead, where shadows danced in the flickering streetlights. What if they come after us? They will, he said, his mind racing. But we can. It deepened. The detective and Claire found refuge in an abandoned building on the outskirts of town, surrounded by shadows and silence. The air was thick with tension and the anticipation of the final act. They knew it wouldn't be long before the police tracked them down again. The detective glanced at Claire, her face illuminated by the dim light leaking through the cracked windows. She was a strange, beautiful contradiction, a woman consumed by her own darkness, yet oddly vulnerable in moments like these. As if sensing his gaze, she looked over and offered a half-smile. What are we going to do now? She asked, a mixture of fear and thrill in her voice. We wait, he replied. His voice steady but his mind racing with a plan. They would lure in the remaining officers, use the building's narrow corridors and hidden spaces to their advantage. It would be their final stand, the moment where everything would end or begin anew. Moments later, the sound of footsteps echoed outside. Claire tensed, her eyes flickering with a mix of excitement and dread. The detective gently squeezed her hand, grounding her. They're here, he whispered, and with a silent nod, they slipped into the shadows, taking their positions in the maze of the old building. The first officer entered, his flashlight sweeping across the room, casting eerie shadows against the walls. He called out. Come out with your hands up. There's nowhere left to run. From her hiding spot, Claire's breathing quickened. She waited, heart pounding, until the officer passed by her. Then, with a silent, predatory grace, she emerged from the darkness, striking with deadly precision. The officer barely had time to react before he was silenced, his radio crackling briefly before going quiet. The detective moved through the building, taking down the next officer with cold efficiency, each action precise and calculated. Together, they navigated the chaos. In moments, they found themselves back to back, facing the last officer, a grizzled veteran who seemed to recognize the desperation and darkness in their eyes. He raised his gun, his hand shaking slightly, but he hesitated, a flicker of pity crossing his face. It doesn't have to end like this, he said softly. There's still a chance to come back from this. But Claire's voice was cold, resolute. No. This is who I am. With one last, decisive motion, she moved forward, and the officer fell. A thick silence settled over the room, broken only by the faint hum of distant sirens. The detective turned to Claire, his face etched with exhaustion and something deeper, a sense of loss. Perhaps, or a realization that he had crossed lines he could never uncross. What now? He asked, his voice hollow. Claire gazed at him, her eyes reflecting the darkness that had consumed her. We disappear. Together. But as they stood there, bloodied and breathless, he saw something shift in her expression, a moment of doubt, a flash of regret. He wondered if this was truly what he wanted, or if he had become so entangled in her web that he'd forgotten the man he once was. Without a word, he walked over to a shattered mirror on the wall, staring at his reflection. For the first time, he saw a stranger looking back, a man tainted by violence, drawn into a darkness he hadn't known was inside him. And in that reflection, he caught a glimpse of something he couldn't deny, a hint of the same hunger that drove Claire, lurking beneath his own gaze. Claire joined him, her reflection a haunting echo beside his. It's not the end, you know, she whispered, a twisted smile playing on her lips. Not for people like us. He tore his gaze away from the mirror, realizing with a sick certainty that she was right. There was no going back. Together, they were bound by a shared darkness, a need for blood and violence that could. As they slipped into the night, leaving the wreckage of their past lives behind, he felt a strange, thrilling sense of freedom. Whatever lay ahead, whatever nightmares they would create, it was their own. They had become the monsters lurking in the shadows, and the world would never see them coming.